Stroll through the aisles of your local Christian bookstore and you'll probably see the words from this morning's text imprinted on t-shirts and bookmarks, embossed on greeting cards, and engraved on plaques suitable for gifts as for high school students, newly ordained pastors, and anyone else who may be facing a major life transition. Surely I know the plans I have for you, says God. Plans for your welfare and not for harm, to give you a future with hope. But taken within its original context, the passage isn't nearly as warm and fuzzy as we would like to imagine. So let's back up a bit and see what's going on here. If we do, we'll find that things aren't going so well for Israel. The southern kingdom of Judah is under siege and on the verge of collapse. The Babylonians have looted the city of Jerusalem, taken its king, and have captured the city's leaders, uprooting them from their homeland and carting them off to the kingdom of Babylon. There were some false prophets that sprung up, promising that everything was going to get better soon. Don't worry about a thing. In no time at all, the exiles would be back in their homeland and everyone would live happily ever after. This is the sort of encouragement and comfort that we might expect to hear, and certainly the message that the exiles would have longed for. But unfortunately, they weren't words of truth. And so Jeremiah sent a letter to the exiles in Babylon, which essentially said there was some good news and some bad news. The good news was, yes, God did indeed have plans for them, plans for their welfare and plans for a future with hope. But the bad news was that it wouldn't be happening for another 70 years. So they may as well settle in for the long haul. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Get on with life. And know that God had not abandoned them. Jeremiah urges them to continue to be faithful, and if they do, God will hear them when they call upon God, and when they search for God, their efforts will be rewarded. So this isn't so much a text about how God has big plans for the future of the high school graduate or the person who is preparing to go into ministry, as it is advice to a population of exiles. We don't hear much in the news today about exiles. People aren't typically taken into captivity, but they are driven from their homes. The word for it is ethnic cleansing. And those who are lucky enough not to be killed by their enemies, but who find themselves on the run for their lives, are called refugees. It's happening in our world right now. Since August of this year, over 500,000 Rohingya refugees have fled the violence in Myanmar. The vast majority are women and children who walk for days through jungles and mountains, or brave dangerous sea voyages across the Bay of Bengal, arriving in the neighboring Bangladesh exhausted, hungry, and sick. But people can experience a sense of exile even in the country of their birth. A conservative estimate of almost 500,000 queer youth who have been exiled from their family and their churches face homelessness each year. And people of color often live lives like exiles in a majority white workplace or culture. According to one study, more than a third of African Americans and Hispanics, as well as almost half of Asians, say they feel like outsiders in their corporate culture. You're like a chameleon, constantly changing the way you are, observes an African American network TV manager. But exile can also happen when the world around you begins to change. You may have lived all your life in one location, but it doesn't feel like your neighborhood anymore. People interact differently than they used to interact. You can experience a sense of dislocation even if you have never left home. The feeling of exile can even happen within your own church. When you discover that the friends with whom you were once close don't attend services anymore. You're surrounded by new faces with new ideas about how things should be done. You no longer hear the songs that you used to sing, and you're just not sure where your place is in the grand scheme of things. The cold, hard fact is the face of Christianity seems to be changing, but it's for the better, even if it may not feel like it sometimes. People today are looking less for inward-focused Christianity, which asks the question, what can I get from God and what's in it for me? And they are looking more for outward-focused Christianity, which not only involves social justice and meeting physical needs, but also involves treating people with kindness, compassion in everyday life, and attending to their spiritual well-being. The church that thrives will be the church that expands its table to include people of different identities. The church that flourishes will be the one that is willing to change how things are done if it means reaching more people. The church that succeeds will be the church that gets to know its neighbor and the needs of its neighbor. And in so doing, it becomes the church that really cares. The church at its best has always equipped people to live out their faith in the world. But you have to be in the world to impact the world. That's what Jeremiah was telling the Jewish exiles. They had to be in the world. They needed to become a part of what was going on around them. They would never survive otherwise. If you ever feel like you just don't belong, then Jeremiah's words are for you. He says that your sense of alienation will change, but it won't be overnight. So until that time, make your home with those around you. Get to know your neighbor. As much as might lie within you, be at peace with others in your community. Your own church is on a journey right now. We're trying some new things that may feel uncomfortable for some people. We're experimenting with different styles and settings of worship. And as fresh and exciting as that may be for some people, not everyone may share that sense of excitement. Some people may be feeling like exiles in their own church. But Jeremiah advises you to make your home with us. Don't isolate yourself, and for goodness sake, don't abandon your spiritual community. Trust that God is doing a good thing, that God's plans are for our welfare and not for harm, to give us a future with hope. But it may take a while. So make yourself comfortable. Be a part of the new thing that God is doing within this church. We desperately need you, each and every one of you. God has placed each of us here for just such a time as this. Jeremiah's words were for a people who lived 600 years before Christ. But they are good words for anyone who has ever felt like an exile at one time or another in their life. For the LGBT person who feels estranged from their family. For the person of color who leads the double life in the workplace. For the person who is trying to keep up in a rapidly changing world. And for the church member who longs for that good old time religion. In a nutshell, Jeremiah's advice is to embrace the exile. In so doing, you will experience the healing described in the closing words of John Fortunato's book, Embracing the Exile. No fear now, no resistance, no sense of loss. All that was dropping away as unnecessary now, extraneous. I began to feel light and warm. Energy began to surge through my whole being, enlivening me as though I were a rusty old turbine that had been charged up and was starting to hum. Then two strong motherly arms reached out and drew me close to the bosom of all that is. And I was just there, just being, enveloped in being. And we wept for joy. May we each experience the peace, the healing, and the joy that comes with embracing our exile. Amen.